The rain on the moon of Typhon did not fall. It was driven sideways by gale-force winds, a relentless sheet of chemical slurry that stung exposed skin and blurred the neon horizon into a kaleidoscope of smeared light. Kyle ran, his boots hammered against the transparent polymer of the skywalk. A fragile ribbon suspended 3,000 feet above the churning smog of the lower levels. Below him, the arteries of the megacity pulsed with the bioluminescent veins of hover traffic, a river of light flowing through the dark canyons of steel and glass. He did not look back. He did not have to. He could feel her presence like a shiver at the base of his spine, a phantom pressure that had hunted him across a dozen star systems for 15 years. A high-pitched whine cut through the roar of the wind, growing louder, vibrating in his teeth. Kyle threw himself into a slide, skidding under a low-hanging conduit pipe just as the air where his head had been hissed and boiled. A smart bolt slammed into the railing, melting the metal into glowing slag. Lysara. She tore out of the heavy smog on a grav bike that looked less like a machine and more like a predatory insect, sleek and black with mandibles of chrome. Her silver hair whipped behind her like a banner of war, defying the helmet she refused to wear. Even at this distance, through the driving rain and the distortion of speed, he could see her eyes. They burned with a bioluminescent violet fury, a genetic marker of her royal lineage, locking onto him with the precision of a targeting computer. Kale scrambled to his feet, his lungs burning. He was 40 years old, and for the last decade and a half, he had slept with one eye open, waiting for this exact moment. "You are getting slow, old man," he told himself, forcing his legs to pump harder. The skywalk ended abruptly ahead, severed by a recent construction accident, leaving a 50-foot gap to the next platform. The grav bike roared, the engine pitch screaming as she accelerated to run him down. Kale reached to his belt, his fingers grazing the cold metal of a contraband distortion unit. It was illegal in 7 sectors and unstable in the rest. But he was out of options. He sprinted for the edge. The bike was close enough now that he could hear the hum of its anti-grav coils displacing the air. Kale jumped, in midair, suspended over the abyss of the city. He slammed his thumb onto the activator. The world twisted. Light bent around him, folding him into a pocket of near invisibility. To the naked eye, he was nothing more than a shimmer of heat, a ghost in the rain. He crashed onto the opposing platform, rolling hard to disperse the impact, and immediately scrambled toward a massive holographic billboard advertising synthetic vacations to the core worlds. He dove through the projection, a momentary sensation of static electricity prickling his skin, and crashed into a maintenance hatch concealed behind the false image of a golden beach. He tumbled into the darkness of a service shaft, the heavy steel door slamming shut behind him. Silence, sudden and heavy, replaced the roar of the storm. The shaft was narrow, illuminated only by the rhythmic blood-red pulse of hazard lights running along the floor. Steam hissed from rusted pipes, filling the air with the smell of ozone and recycled lubricant. Kyle leaned against the wall, sliding down until he hit the grating floor. He checked the charge on his pistol. 3 shots. He checked the distortion unit. Burnt out, fused into a useless lump of plastic. It does not matter, he thought. She knows. She always knows. The steel door groaned. The metal began to glow cherry red in the center, heat radiating inward. A circle of molten steel, perfect in its geometry, melted away and clattered to the floor. Lysara stepped through the breach. She moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, stepping over the molten slag without looking down. She had abandoned the bike. In the crimson strobing of the hazard lights, she looked like a vengeful deity carved from obsidian and moonlight. Her armor was a second skin of shifting nano-weave, dark gray and matte, designed to absorb impact and scatter sensor readings. In her right hand, she held it, the neuro-whip. It was not a tool of dead matter. It was bioengineered from the nervous system of a deep space predator, a living thing that twitched and coiled of its own accord, reading the electrical impulses of her rage. Cale stood up slowly, raising his hands to show empty palms. He kept the pistol tucked at the small of his back, hidden. "You are persistent," Cale said, his voice raspy. "I will give you that, Princess. Most hunters would have quit after the incident on the ice moon." Lysara stopped 10 feet away, the whip uncoiled, the tip hovering in the air like a cobra waiting to strike. "That was not persistence, Kyle. That was warm-up. And do not call me Princess. You forfeited the right to speak my titles when you murdered my mother." "I did not kill her." "Liar!" The word was a whip crack in itself. "Your face was on the screens and your signature was on the security override. I watched you run." "You watched what they wanted you to see," Cale said, his muscles tensing. He knew her patterns. She liked to strike high, disarm first, cripple second. 15 years. Lysara, 15 years and you still haven't asked yourself why a human intelligence officer would sabotage the only peace treaty that kept his own species from being annihilated. "Because you are a mercenary coward," she hissed. "And you sold us for credits." She struck. The whip lashed out faster than human reflexes could track, a blur of motion. But Kyle had spent 15 years studying that blur. He twisted left, the living tendril snapping the air where his ear had been, cracking the concrete wall behind him. Dust exploded outward. Kyle lunged forward, closing the distance. At range, she was death. In close quarters, she was still death, but he had a chance. Lysara pivoted, her knee coming up to drive into his stomach. Cale caught her leg, absorbing the impact that nearly broke his ribs, and used her momentum to slam her into the wall. She grunted, a sharp intake of breath, but she did not panic. She was a warrior born of a high-gravity world. She was stronger than him, faster than him, and angrier than him. She brought her elbow down, smashing it into his shoulder, driving him to his knees. The whip looped back around, coiling tight around his left wrist, pinning his hand to the pipe running along the wall. The living fibers tightened, thorns emerging to dig into his skin. Kyle gritted his teeth against the pain, ignoring the warm trickle of blood running down his forearm. With his free hand, he grabbed the front of her combat harness, yanking her down toward him. It was a risky, desperate move, a lover's embrace turned into a brawl. Their bodies collided, armor grinding against synthetic fabric. For a heartbeat, they were frozen there, faces inches apart in the pulsing red light. He could see the intricate alien flecks of gold in her violet eyes. He could smell the scent of rain and ozone that clung to her hair. The tension was electric, a physical weight that pressed between them. It was hate, pure and distilled, but beneath it lay something jagged and unresolved, the ghost of a friendship that had died 15 years ago, and the darker, sharper edge of an attraction neither of them would ever admit. "9 lie here," Kyle whispered, the code phrase slipping out before he could stop it. Lysara's eyes widened by a fraction. "What did you say?" "I said you are too close." Kyle twisted his hips, leveraging his weight to off-balance her. As she stumbled back, he reached behind him, not for his own gun, but for the sonic pistol holstered at her thigh. His fingers closed around the grip. He ripped it free, leveled it at her chest, and fired. The sonic pulse did not kill. It slammed into her like a physical hammer. Lysara was thrown backward, crashing into the opposite wall. The whip went slack, releasing his wrist. Kyle scrambled back, gasping for air, raising the stolen weapon. Lysara slid down the wall, shaking her head to clear the disorientation. Her hand flashed to her boot, drawing a monofilament blade that shimmered with a lethal, silent energy. "No more talking," she snarled, bracing her feet to spring. Kyle leveled the gun. "Lysara, listen to me." The world ended. It was not a figure of speech. A concussive blast, deeper and louder than thunder, ripped through the maintenance shaft. The floor buckled upward. The ceiling groaned and sheared away, exposing the storm-tossed sky above. The shockwave hit them both, knocking Kale flat and sending Lysara skidding toward the gaping hole that had just opened in the floor, revealing a drop of 2,000 feet to the traffic lanes below. Station-wide alarms began to blare, a dissonant, screeching wail that cut through the ringing in Kale's ears. This was not a police siren. This was a war siren. Debris rained down, chunks of concrete, twisted rebar, shattered glass. The megacity was under attack. Kale looked up. Lysara was dangling from the edge of the broken floor, one hand gripping an exposed cable, her boots slipping on the wet, crumbling duracrete. The monofilament blade tumbled from her grasp, falling into the abyss. She looked at him. There was no pleading in her eyes, only a cold acceptance of the end. She expected him to shoot her, or simply watch her fall. "Damn it!" Kale cursed. He lunged. He threw himself across the trembling floor plates, sliding on his stomach, and grabbed her wrist just as the cable snapped. The jolt nearly pulled his arm out of its socket. He roared with the effort, digging his boots into a grate, anchoring them both against gravity. "Let go!" Lysara screamed over the roar of the wind. "Let me fall, traitor!" "Shut up!" Kale gritted his teeth, his muscles trembling. "I am not killing you today." He dragged her up, inch by agonizing inch, until she could hook a leg over the solid ledge. They collapsed together onto the safe ground, panting, covered in dust and rain. Above them, the sky was streaked with the contrails of missiles. Kale looked at her, at the woman who had sworn to mount his head on a pike, and then he looked at the chaos erupting outside. And for a second, the burning megacity faded, replaced by the memory of a sun-drenched terrace. 15 years ago. The sun on the planet Aurea was not harsh. It was a gentle golden warmth that smelled of blooming jasmine and dry earth. The terrace of the diplomatic spire overlooked a valley of crystal blue water, a paradise compared to the industrial hellscapes Kale was used to. He was 25 then, his uniform crisp, his eyes bright and unburdened by the cynicism that would later define him. He stood at the edge of the crowd, scanning the faces of the dignitaries. Humans in formal suits clinked glasses with alien delegates in flowing ceremonial robes. Center stage was Lysara's mother, the matriarch. She was tall, regal, her violet eyes crinkling with a smile as she spoke of a future where their two species stopped pointing guns and started building bridges. "Impressive, isn't she?" Kyle turned. A senior officer, a man named Voros with a scar running through his eyebrow, stood beside him. Voros held 2 glasses of sparkling nectar, but his eyes were cold. "She is," Kyle agreed. "She actually believes it. The peace." "Peace is expensive, Kyle," Voros said softly. He handed Kale a small, flat data disk. "Command has new orders. The matriarch is a liability. Her concessions to the Trade Federation are going to bankrupt our sector. We need a regime change." Kyle looked at the disk, then at the matriarch, and finally at the young girl standing beside her. Lysara was barely 20 in human years, sharp-featured and watchful, wearing the initiate robes of the Huntress caste. She looked bored by the politics, her eyes scanning the perimeter, scanning him. "You want me to plant a jammer," Kale said, keeping his voice low. "Disable the security grid so a team can slip in?" "Better," Voros said. "The The disk contains a kinetic overload sequence for the main power core. It will look like a catastrophic malfunction. No survivors in the main hall. Kyle felt the blood drain from his face. There are 300 civilians here. Children. Collateral damage for the greater good. Kale looked at the disc in his hand. He looked at Lysara, who was now laughing at something her mother whispered. No, Kale said. He crushed the disc in his hand, the plastic shattering. I won't do it, Voros. Voros sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. I was afraid you lacked the stomach. He tapped his earpiece. Plan B. The explosion did not come from the power core. It came from the sky. 3 unmarked dropships screamed out of the clouds, raining plasma fire onto the terrace. The world dissolved into white noise and screaming. The golden sunlight was choked by black smoke. Secure the matriarch, Kale shouted, drawing his weapon and sprinting toward the podium. He saw the assassin, a figure in shifting optical camouflage, materialize behind the matriarch. Kale fired, but he was too late. A beam of coherent energy pierced the matriarch's chest. She fell without a sound. Mother! The scream tore from Lysara's throat. Kyle reached them a second later. He saw the assassin turn, raising a weapon toward the grieving daughter. Kyle tackled the invisible figure, crashing through a glass partition. They wrestled amidst the shards, blood slicking their hands. The assassin was strong, mechanically enhanced. He kicked Kale in the jaw, stunning him, and activated a jump jet harness, blasting into the smoke-filled sky. Kale staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. He turned back to the podium. Lysara was on her knees, cradling her mother's lifeless body. Her white robes were soaked in violet blood. She looked up, her eyes wide with shock and grief. Behind her, the massive holoscreens that lined the plaza flickered and changed. The diplomatic feed was replaced by a looping video. Kyle, in the security room earlier that day, apparently bypassing the defense grid. It was a deep fake, perfect and damning. Traitor, Lysara whispered, the word trembling on her lips. Lysara, no. Kale stepped forward, hand outstretched. It wasn't me. Security drones descended from the smoke, weapons locking onto him. Target identified, the mechanical voice boomed. Operative Kale, now priority, terminate. He had to run. If he stayed, he died, and the truth died with him. He looked at Lysara one last time, the hate already hardening in her eyes, turning her grief into a weapon, and then he vaulted over the railing, vanishing into the chaos. The memory shattered as a piece of the megacity's skyline exploded. Kale blinked, the rain of the gas giant moon washing the dust from his eyes. He and Lysara were huddled on a jagged outcropping of rebar and concrete, the remains of the maintenance shaft entrance. Below them, the city was a war zone. Orbital defense cannons, massive turrets mounted on the skyscrapers, were firing upward, turning the night sky into a grid of tracer fire. A sleek, predatory cruiser, painted entirely in light-absorbing matte black with no insignia, strafed the financial district. Buildings crumbled like sandcastles. Who are they? Lysara demanded, shouting to be heard over the destruction. She pushed herself away from him, her hand going instinctively to where her blade used to be. Is this your backup, Kyle? Did you call in a fleet to cover your escape? Use your eyes. Lysara, Kyle yelled back, pointing at the black cruiser. That ship is using phased energy weaponry. That is restricted tech. My people don't have that. Your people don't have that. You have had 15 years to make new friends, she spat. You orchestrated this, just like Aurea. Create chaos, kill the witnesses, slip away in the smoke. She lunged at him again, her fingers curling into claws. She was running on pure adrenaline and trauma. seeing the burning city of today superimposed over the burning terrace of her past. "Stop it!" Kale deflected her strike, grabbing her shoulders. "Look above you." A burning shuttle, struck by stray fire from the black cruiser, was spiraling out of the sky. It was tumbling directly toward their precarious perch on the balcony. It was a mass of twisting metal and leaking fuel, huge as a house, roaring like a dying dragon. They had 2 seconds. The door back to the shaft was blocked by rubble. The only way out was down. "Do you trust me?" Kyle shouted. "Never!" "Good enough!" Kyle tackled her. He drove his shoulder into her stomach, wrapping his arms around her waist, and threw them both off the edge of the balcony. They fell into the void. The wind tore at them, a physical force trying to rip them apart. Kale fumbled for the activation cord on his chest rig. He had 1 charge left in his emergency grav chute, a cheap, contraband manufacturing defect he had bought off a smuggler 3 systems back. If it failed, they would be a wet smear on the pavement in 10 seconds. He yanked the cord. The deceleration was brutal. The grav chute fired a pulse of reverse gravity that slammed into them like a wall. The harness dug into Kale's skin, bruising bone. He held on to Lysara with everything he had, pressing her face into the crook of his neck to shield her from the whiplash. For a terrifying, intimate moment, they simply hung there, suspended in the freefall. Her body was pressed against his, every curve and hard angle of her armor locking against his frame. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, tearing at the fabric of his jacket. He could feel her heart hammering against his chest, rapid, frantic, alive. And she could feel his. She could feel the terror in him. Liars could fake words. They could fake expressions, but they could not fake the primal rhythm of a heart facing death. There was no deception in his fear, only a desperate, overwhelming need to keep her safe. The grav pulse faded, and they dropped the last 50 feet, crashing through a canvas awning of a street market and landing hard on a lower landing platform. They rolled apart, tangling in the torn fabric of the awning. Kale groaned, clutching his ribs. He tasted copper in his mouth. Lysara was up first. She was shaking, her silver hair plastered to her face by the rain. She stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked at the burning skyline above, then down at her hands, then at him. He had saved her, twice in 5 minutes. "Why?" she breathed. Kale sat up, wincing as his back popped. He spat a mouthful of bloody saliva onto the metal deck. "Because if you die, I have no one to chase me. I would get bored, probably take up knitting." It was a bitter, deflected joke, his armor against the world. Lysara did not laugh. She stared at him, confusion warring with the hatred that had sustained her for a decade and a half. She reached down to her boot and drew a backup weapon, a small, kinetic pistol. She leveled it at his head. Her hand was steady, but her eyes were not. "Give me one reason why I should not finish this right now," she said. "One reason that is not a lie." Emergency sirens wailed around them. Evacuation drones buzzed overhead like angry hornets, ordering citizens to seek shelter. The black cruiser was circling back for another run. Kale looked down the barrel of the gun. He was tired. He was so incredibly tired of running. "Because the people attacking this city?" Kale said, his voice low and serious. "They are the same people who killed your mother, the same people who hired the assassin, the same people who framed me." "The Council of 9, she said mockingly. "Your imaginary boogeymen." "They aren't imaginary anymore. Lysara, look at the ship." He gestured vaguely upward. "That insignia on the hull? It doesn't exist in any database you have access to. But I have seen it. I stole a data cache 6 months ago. It has names. It has bank accounts. It has the architectural plans for the massacre on Aurea." The gun wavered slightly. If you kill me, Kyle continued, holding her gaze, you kill the evidence. You kill the only lead you have ever had that actually explains why the security grid went down that day. You get your revenge, sure, but you lose the truth. Is that what the matriarch would have wanted? A blind executioner? Lysara's jaw tightened. A vein throbbed in her neck. She looked at the gun, then at Kale's bloody face. She was a huntress, trained to close the loop, to finish the kill. But she was also a daughter who had spent 15 years with a hole in her heart that violence had never managed to fill. She lowered the gun. "If you are lying," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "I will not just kill you, Kale. I will peel your mind apart layer by layer until there is nothing left but screaming." "Deal," Kale said. He held out his hands. Lysara reached into her belt and pulled out a neural collar. It was a heavy metallic ring pulsing with blue light. She stepped forward and clamped it around his neck. It locked with a magnetic snap, the needle sinking into the base of his skull. Kyle gasped, his vision whitening for a second as the collar synced with his nervous system. "One wrong move," Lysara said, tapping the control interface on her gauntlet. "And I scramble your motor functions. You walk where I tell you to walk." "Understood," Kyle wheezed, rubbing his neck. She grabbed his arm, not gently, and shoved him toward the docking bay doors 100 yards down the platform. "My ship is docked in Bay 4. Move." They walked through the chaos of the evacuating crowd. Refugees pushed past them, clutching possessions, screaming for family members. Kyle walked with his head down, the collar heavy on his neck. As they reached the hangar, the blast doors opened to reveal the dark void of space beyond the atmospheric field. The stars were out, cold and indifferent to the fires burning on the moon below. Kyle glanced at them. For 15 years, those stars had been his hiding places, every nebula a curtain, every asteroid field a trench. He had run until he had forgotten how to stand still. He looked at Lysara's back, the rigid set of her shoulders, the tension in her stride. She thought she had captured him. She thought she had won. But as he stepped onto the ramp of her ship, Kale made a silent vow. He was done running. He was done hiding in the shadows while the galaxy burned. He was going to take this furious, broken woman, and he was going to force her to see the light, even if it blinded them both. This time, he thought, stepping into the belly of the hunter's ship, we break the cycle, or we die trying. "Move," Lysara commanded from the top of the ramp. "I'm coming," Kale said. "I'm right on time." The interior of the hunter ship was not built. It was grown. Kyle sat restrained in a gravity chair that felt less like furniture and more like a hardened organic callus rising from the floor. The walls of the vessel, which Lysara called the night bloom, pulsed with bioluminescent veins of soft indigo and teal, mimicking the rhythm of a resting heartbeat. The air smelled of ozone and crushed petals, a deceptive sweetness for a machine designed to kill. Kale pulled against the magnetic restraints binding his wrists and ankles. They did not budge. He looked forward, toward the teardrop-shaped viewports. The stars outside were stretching, elongating into infinite lines of brilliant white as the ship prepared to slip into the fold stream. Lysara stood at the helm, her back to him. The strange, living light of the cockpit reflected in the polished curves of her armor, making her look like a statue carved from starlight and violence. She tapped a sequence into a membrane console that rippled under her touch like water. "Fold stream insertion in 10 seconds, the ship's AI announced. The voice was smooth, androgynous, and dripped with a terrifying calm. "Take us deep," Lysara commanded. "No transit lanes, I want the ghost routes." "Compliance," the AI replied. The universe outside shattered, The stars vanished, replaced by a swirling tunnel of violets and bruised blacks. The ship shuddered, the organic hull groaning as it pierced the dimensional barrier. Kyle felt his stomach lurch into his throat, the familiar nausea of superluminal travel hitting him hard. Lysara turned. The bioluminescence of the ship caught the fury in her eyes, making them glow with an intensity that made Kale flinch. She walked toward him, the heels of her boots clicking rhythmically against the chitinous deck. She held a device in her hands, a crown of weaving, twitching black nanotendrils that moved like sea anemones. "Comfortable?" she asked, her voice devoid of warmth. "I have had better flights," Kale rasped, testing the give of the collar around his neck. "Usually, they serve peanuts. You will find my hospitality lacks certain amenities," Lysara said. She stopped directly in front of him. "Like mercy." She raised the crown. Kale stiffened. He knew what that device was. It was a mnemosiny interface, a psychic interrogation tool used by her royal guard. It did not just read memories. It dragged them to the surface, raw and bleeding, forcing the subject to relive them in real time while the interrogator watched. "Lysara, don't," Kale warned, his voice low. "You do not want to see what is in my head." "I want to see everything," she countered. "I want to see the moment you decided to betray us. I want to feel your pulse when you pulled the trigger." She jammed the crown onto his head. The world dissolved into white fire. There was no transition. 1 second, Kale was on the ship. The next, he was standing on the sun-drenched terrace of Aurea, 15 years ago. The smell of jasmine and burning flesh filled his nose. The heat of the explosions blistered his skin. It was not a movie, it was happening now. He screamed, his physical body thrashing in the chair aboard the ship, but his mind was trapped in the past. Lysara was there with him, a phantom observer floating in the smoke. She saw what he saw. She felt the panic hammering in his chest, not the cold calculation of a killer, but the frantic terror of a young man trying to save lives. "Look at it!" Lysara's voice boomed from the sky of the memory. "Show me your guilt." Kyle ran through the chaos. He saw the matriarch fall. He felt the phantom impact of the shockwave, but he fought the current of the memory. The interface tried to steer him toward the official narrative, the edited clips she had watched 1,000 times on the news feeds. But Kale gritted his teeth, his mental defenses slamming down like iron gates. "No!" Kale growled in the shared mind space. "Look closer!" He forced the memory to pivot. He dragged Lysara's consciousness away from his own fleeing form and toward the shadows of the colonnade. "What are you doing?" Lysara demanded, her presence flickering like a storm. "Showing you the truth." Kyle focused with agonizing intensity. The memory blurred, static clawing at the edges of the vision. But he held it. He focused on the figure in the optical camouflage, the assassin he had wrestled with. In the shared vision, the assassin turned. For the first time, Lysara saw what the news feeds had cut out. The assassin was not wearing human military fatigues. They were wearing a suit of unmarked, sleek black polymer, and for one split second, as the assassin raised their arm to strike Kale, a patch on their shoulder caught the light. It was a symbol, a serpent eating its own tail, wrapped around a 9-pointed star. "I do not know that crest," Lysara whispered in the mind space, her certainty faltering. "Look at the security feeds," Kyle roared, dragging her attention to the wall of monitors in the security booth he had supposedly sabotaged. In the memory, the screens were flickering, the time codes were jumping, skipping seconds. Someone was editing the footage in real time, remotely. "Impossible," Lysara said. "The logs were sealed." "Sealed by whom?" Kale shouted. Suddenly a wall of white static slammed into them. It was not natural forgetfulness, it was a psychic block, a buried protocol within the memory itself, or perhaps a failsafe in the interface crown reacting to forbidden data. The pain was blinding. Lysara ripped the crown from Kale's head. They were back on the ship. Kale slumped forward in the restraints, gasping for air, sweat dripping from his nose. His nose was bleeding. Lysara stumbled back, clutching the console for support. She looked pale, her violet eyes wide and shaken. She had felt it. She had felt his grief. She had felt his desperate desire to save her mother. It tasted nothing like the malice she had been told to expect. "That was a trick," she whispered, though her voice lacked its usual steel. "A fabrication. You can't fake neural resonance," Kale wheezed, spitting blood onto the pristine deck. "You felt my fear. Was I lying?" Lysara stared at him, her chest heaving. She opened her mouth to speak, to accuse him again, but the words died in her throat. She spun on her heel and stormed out of the interface room, the door hissing shut behind her. Kyle let his head drop back against the headrest. He was shaking. Her heart rate 140 beats per minute. The AI's smooth voice echoed in the room. "Cortisol levels critical. You biologicals are so dramatic. My ventilation systems are struggling to filter the stench of your panic." "Nice to meet you too," Kale muttered, closing his eyes. "You have a name. Or should I just call you Bucket of Bolts?" "I am designation 7YL, the AI replied haughtily. "But the mistress calls me Syl. And for the record, if you bleed on the upholstery again, I will vent the atmosphere in this compartment." Charming. On the bridge, Lysara paced. Her hands were trembling. She clenched them into fists, forcing the tremors to stop. She needed clarity. She needed orders. She activated the quantum comm array, setting the encryption to the highest clearance, black sun level. The holographic projector hummed, and a column of blue light materialized in the center of the room. It did not form a face, only a distorted, shadowy silhouette. "Huntress." The voice was distorted, layered with harmonic overtones. "Report." "Target secured," Lysara said, snapping to attention. "I have Kyle. We are in fold stream transit to the Citadels." "Negative," the voice snapped. The harshness of the tone startled her. Her superiors had always been calm, detached. "Change of orders? Priority override Omega-9? Lysara frowned. "Omega-9? That is a sterilization code. The human is a contagion. Huntress. He carries jagged data that could destabilize the Alliance. You are not to bring him to the Citadels. You are to execute him immediately. Vaporize the body. Destroy his neural implants. Do not download his cache." Lysara felt a cold chill slide down her spine. "But the protocol is interrogation. He claims to have evidence regarding the Aurea massacre. If I kill him now, we lose that intelligence." "There is no intelligence," the voice roared, cracking with uncharacteristic urgency. "He is a manipulator. Do as you are told, Lysara. This comes from the High Council. End him. Now." The link severed abruptly. The hologram vanished. Lysara stood in the silence of the bridge. The order echoed in her mind. Vaporize the body, destroy the implants. Why destroy the implants? Unless the implants contained something the Council was afraid of. She narrowed her eyes. She had been a dutiful soldier for 15 years. She had killed pirates, rebels, and traitors without question. But she was a hunter first, and a hunter knew when the wind had changed. She marched back to the interface room, but she did not enter. Instead, she accessed the monitoring station outside the door. She pulled up the diagnostics of the neural collar she had placed on Kale. "Syl," she said. Run a deep spectrum scan on the prisoner's collar. Look for passive signals. Scanning, the AI drawled. Oh, that is interesting. What? There are quantum tags embedded in the collar's lock mechanism, and in his spinal interface. They are dormant, but they are designed to ping a receiver every 12 hours. Someone has been tracking him. Lysara stared at the screen. Tracking him? For how long? Based on the isotope decay. 6 years. Lysara felt the floor drop out from under her. Kale had been on the run for 15 years. If someone had been tracking him for 6, they could have caught him a dozen times over. They didn't want him caught. They wanted him running. They were using him. And by extension, they were using her to chase him. She wasn't a righteous avenger. She was a sheepdog, herding the target wherever the masters wanted him to go. She slammed her fist into the bulkhead, denting the metal. She entered the cell. Kale looked up, weary. They told you to kill me, didn't they? He asked quietly. Lysara stopped. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the filter of her hatred. She saw the gray in his beard, the scars on his neck, the exhaustion etched into his soul. They ordered a sterilization, Lysara said. They want your implants destroyed. Of course they do, Kale said, because my implants are the key. To what? To the graveyard. Kale sat up straighter. I stole a data shard from a courier drone 6 months ago. I couldn't decrypt it, but I found the origin point. It came from a dead relay station in the Graveway sector. I hid the shard there because I knew if I kept it, they would kill me to get it back. The Graveway, Lysara said, her voice hushed. That is forbidden space. The fold stream currents are unstable. That is why it's the perfect hiding spot, Kyle said. I can take you there. I can show you the evidence, the names, the bank accounts, the orders, everything. And why should I trust you? Lysara crossed her arms. You are a cornered animal. Because you are a hunter, Kale said softly. And you hate being played even more than you hate me. He was right. The realization burned in her gut like a coal. Lysara drew her sonic pistol. Kyle flinched, but she did not aim at him. She aimed at the locking mechanism of his chair. She fired. The clamps hissed and released. Get up, she commanded. Kyle rubbed his wrists, looking at her with cautious surprise. We have a deal? We have a temporary alignment of interests, Lysara corrected sharply. If this is a trap, Kale, I will leave you in the Graveway to float forever. Fair enough, Kale said, standing up. Lead the way, Captain. The Graveway was a scar on the face of the universe. It was a region of space where the laws of physics were more like polite suggestions. The night bloom shuddered violently as it dropped out of the primary fold stream and into the chaotic currents of the sector. Outside the viewports, the cosmos was a sickly, swirling gray. There were no stars here, only ghosts. Stabilizers are at maximum, Syl announced, sounding genuinely stressed for the first time. I am detecting temporal echoes. Port side. Kale gripped the edge of the navigation console. He watched as a spectral image of a ship flickered into existence alongside them. It was the night bloom. But this version was burning, its hull torn open, spinning into the void. Is that us? Kyle asked, his throat dry. A potential us, Lysara said, her fingers flying across the controls. An echo of a timeline where we failed the entry vector. Ignore it. It is not real. It looks real. Focus, Lysara barked. The grav shear is increasing. The ship groaned, a sound like a dying whale. The artificial gravity plates beneath their feet flickered and died. Kale floated upward, weightless. Lysara, caught off guard, drifted from the helm. The ship pitched violently to the right, throwing them across the bridge. They collided in midair. Kale grabbed a handhold on the ceiling with one hand and caught Lysara by the waist with the other, anchoring them both. She grabbed his jacket to steady herself. Suddenly, the gravity kicked back in, but at half strength. They drifted slowly toward the floor, entangled. Lysara ended up braced over him, her hands pressed against his chest, his back against the bulkhead. Their faces were inches apart. Her hair, silver and weightless, formed a halo around them. He could feel the warmth of her body through the armor. Her breathing was ragged. For a moment, the crisis outside vanished. There was only the hum of the ship and the scent of ozone in her. "You have," Kale said, his voice breathless. "A very aggressive piloting style." Lysara stared at him. The adrenaline was coursing through her veins, mixing with something else, the lingering resonance from the psychic interface. She looked at his lips, then up to his eyes. The hatred was there, but it was cracking, revealing the confusion underneath. "You talk too much," she whispered. And then, absurdly, Kale laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of laughter, born of near-death hysteria. "I thought we were dead. I really thought that ghost ship was us." Lysara looked at him, and the corner of her mouth twitched. A small, reluctant smile broke through her stony mask. "You screamed like a recruit." "I did not scream. I expressed a manly vocalization of concern." They laughed together, a brief, sudden sound that felt like oxygen in a vacuum. It was unguarded. It was human. Then Lysara realized she was straddling the man she had sworn to kill. Her smile vanished. The ice returned to her eyes. She shoved herself away from him, floating back toward the helm with a sharp kick. "Gravity is stabilizing," she said, her voice flat. "Do not touch me again." Kale floated there for a second, the warmth of her body still lingering on his chest, before dragging himself back to the co-pilot station. "Understood." "Approaching coordinates," Syl announced, breaking the tension. "Target acquired. Dead relay station ahead." The relay station was a skeleton. It was a lattice of rusted beams and silent antennae orbiting a brown dwarf star that gave off barely enough light to see. It looked like a tombstone left to rot in the dark. Lysara docked the ship manually, the clamps locking onto the station's airlock with a metallic groan. "Atmosphere is thin but breathable," Syl reported. "Temperature is freezing. Take coats." "Stay here," Lysara told the AI. "Keep the engines hot." She and Kale moved into the airlock. Lysara handed him a thermal cloak and a flashlight, but she kept her weapons. She did not give him a gun. The station was a maze of shadows. Emergency strips flickered with a dying amber light, casting long, jumping shadows on the walls. The silence was absolute, heavy enough to crush a man. "This way," Kale whispered, his breath pluming in the cold air. "Server room is on the lower deck." They navigated the corridors, stepping over frozen cables and debris. Kale stopped at a heavy blast door. He punched a code into the keypad, a sequence he had memorized 6 months ago. The door ground open. The server room was lined with rows of physical data banks, old tech that couldn't be hacked remotely. Kyle moved to the third row, knelt, and pulled open a drawer. It was empty. "It is gone," Lysara said, raising her weapon. "You lied." "No," Kyle said, frantic. He felt under the lip of the drawer. "I taped it. Old school." He pulled out a small, jagged crystal shard. "Got it. Alert," Syl's voice crackled over their comms. "Motion detected in your sector. Multiple contacts. They are not biological." A red laser dot appeared on Kale's chest. "Down!" Lysara screamed. She tackled him just as the air filled with plasma bolts. Security drones, spider-like machines with glowing red eyes, dropped from the ceiling vents. They had been dormant, waiting, reactivated remotely. Lysara rolled to her feet, her sonic pistol barking. She shattered the first drone, sending shrapnel flying. Her whip lashed out, wrapping around a second drone and flinging it into a server rack. "Move!" she yelled. They sprinted for the door. Bolts sizzled past them, melting the metal walls. A drone dropped directly in front of Lysara, charging its main cannon. She was off balance, her whip extended. She couldn't bring her gun around in time. Kyle didn't think. He threw himself in front of her. The plasma bolt hit him in the shoulder. It sounded like meat sizzling on a grill. Kyle cried out, the force of the blast spinning him around and slamming him into the floor. Lysara roared, a sound of pure fury. She drove her monofilament blade through the drone's central eye, twisting it until the machine sparked and died. Silence fell again. "Kyle!" Lysara dropped to her knees beside him. The wound was bad. The plasma had burned through the thermal cloak and into the muscle of his shoulder. He was pale, his eyes rolling back. "Don't you die on me," she hissed. "We have a deal." She tore open his shirt. Her hands were glowing. Her people possessed a latent bioenergy, usually used for combat, but capable of accelerating cell regeneration if focused. She pressed her glowing palm directly onto the burned flesh. Kale screamed, arching his back. "Hold still," Lysara commanded, her voice trembling. She poured her energy into him, and as their skin connected, the neural resonance flared again, stronger this time, amplified by the pain and the life force transfer. The world dissolved into white again. But this time, Lysara didn't see memories of the massacre. She felt him. She felt the crushing weight of his regrets. She saw the faces of every civilian he had failed to save, hanging in his mind like ghosts. She felt the moment he first saw her, not as a target, but as a young girl laughing on a terrace. She felt the ache in his chest every time he had looked at her over the last 15 years, the guilt of knowing his existence had ruined her life. He didn't hate her. He had never hated her. He admired her. He was terrified for her. Lysara gasped, tears stinging her eyes. The intimacy was overwhelming. It was more naked than nudity. She was inside his heart, and it was broken, just like hers. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her other hand found his waist, gripping him tight, anchoring him to the world. Kyle's eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, and she knew he could feel her too. Her loneliness, her exhaustion, the terrifying realization that she didn't want him to die. "Lysara," he breathed. "Quiet," she said softly. The glow in her hand faded. The wound was sealed, a jagged pink scar replacing the charred ruin. She helped him sit up. They were both trembling. The air between them was thick, charged with the adrenaline of the fight and the shock of the connection. Kale reached out, his hand hovering near her face. "You saved me." "You took the shot," she said, her voice barely audible. "Why?" "Habit," he whispered. They stared at each other, the line between hunter and hunted blurring into something indistinguishable. The desire was there now, undeniable, tangled with the pain and the years of wasted time. Lysara pulled back, breaking the spell. She needed to focus. She snatched the data shard from the floor where it had fallen. "We need to see what was worth dying for," she said, her voice shaky. She slotted the shard into her wrist computer. A holographic projection sprang up in the dark corridor. Files scrolled past. Bank transfers. Comms logs. "By the stars," Lysara whispered. It was there. The proof, the Council of Nine. It wasn't a myth. It was a coalition of high-ranking officials from both the Human Alliance and the alien houses. She saw the signature of the counselor who had given her the kill order just an hour ago. They had engineered the Aurea massacre to destabilize the peace treaty. They had orchestrated the attack on the megacity to drive up weapons stock prices. They had kept Kale alive, hurting him, to keep the threat of human terrorism active. And then, the final file. It was corrupted, fragmented static, but a single symbol remained clear, the serpent and the star. And beneath it, a phrase written in an ancient dialect. 9 lie here. 9 lie here, Lysara read aloud. What does it mean? A location? A grave, Kyle said, leaning heavily against the wall. It means we have to find where the bodies are buried. Lysara looked at the hologram, then at Kale. The certainty of her life, her mission, her hate, her loyalty crumbled into dust. She was not a hero. She was a weapon held by the very hand she thought she was fighting. She stood up, offering a hand to Kale. Can you walk? She asked. Kale took her hand. His grip was weak, but warm. I can follow you. No, Lysara said, pulling him to his feet. Her violet eyes burned, not with fury this time, but with a cold, terrifying resolve. We are done following. Now, we hunt. The night bloom sliced through the void, leaving the haunted eddies of the graveway behind. Ahead, the trade lanes of the civilized sector burned like ribbons of diamond dust against the black. They were heading for Station Unity Prime, a sprawling metropolis station anchored in neutral space, a monument to the fragile peace that held the galaxy together. Inside the ship, the silence had changed. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of a hunter waiting to strike. It was the tense, vibrating silence of a truce held together by spit and wire. Lysara sat at the helm, her eyes scanning the approach vectors. The data shard from the dead relay burned a hole in her pocket. She had decrypted enough to know that the rot went deep. Counselors she had saluted, admirals she had bled for. They were all compromised. She trusted no one, except, perhaps, the man pacing the deck behind her. Stop pacing, Lysara said without turning around. You are wearing a groove in the floor. Your floor is grown from crystal, Kyle replied, his voice lighter than it had been in days. I would need better boots to scratch it. He was still wearing the neural collar, but the heavy restraints were gone. He walked freely, stretching his limbs, though Lysara kept a dedicated monitor on his biosigns. It was a concession to necessity. If they were going to survive what came next, she needed him mobile. She needed him capable. It is annoying, she muttered. It is anxiety, Kale corrected. I have not been to Unity Prime in 10 years. Last time I was there, I had to exit through a garbage chute. A fitting exit for a spy. I prefer the term information acquisition specialist. Lysara snorted, a sound that was almost a laugh. You humans and your soft words. You wrap everything in layers to hide the sharp edges, just like your bodies. So fragile. No carapace, no redundant organs. How have you survived this long? Kyle leaned against the bulkhead, crossing his arms. We run fast, and we have charming personalities. Charming, Lysara repeated, testing the word like it was a foreign currency. Is that what you call it? I thought it was just a lack of survival instinct. Same thing, usually. She glanced back at him. His face was pale, the healing scar on his shoulder a stark reminder of the plasma bolt he had taken for her. He looked rough, unshaven, and undeniably human. And yet, when he smiled, the lines around his eyes softened in a way that made her chest ache with a strange, unfamiliar pressure. Go rest, she commanded, turning back to the console. We dock in 6 hours. I need you sharp, not charming. Kyle did not rest. He found his way to the ship's observation lounge, a small blister of transparency on the hull that offered a panoramic view of the stars. He sat on the floor, watching the starlight shift from red to blue as they decelerated. It is beautiful, isn't it? Lysara stood in the doorway. She had shed her armor for a simple flight suit of dark, woven fabric. It made her look smaller, less like a weapon and more like a person. It is, Kyle agreed, when you are not being shot at. She walked into the room, hesitating, then sat down on the bench opposite him. The distance between them was careful, measured. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Lysara asked. The move with the drone. You did not hesitate. I grew up on a colony called Persephone 4, Kale said, his gaze drifting to a cluster of dim stars in the distance. It was a mining rock, failed atmosphere, barely enough food. The company abandoned us when I was 12. We had to learn to defend the hydroponics bays from raiders. A hard life, Lysara noted. It was, Kyle nodded. But it wasn't all bad. We learned to laugh. My father used to say that if you can't find something funny about starving, you are already dead. We made games out of the rationing. We told stories. We learned that a person is more than the badge they wear or the job they do. We are the choices we make when the lights go out. Lysara watched him. She had been raised in the spire, surrounded by silk and steel, taught that duty was the only virtue and emotion was a weakness. To hear him speak of poverty with such warmth disarmed her more effectively than any weapon. I was taught that laughter is a release of tension, she said stiffly. Tactically inefficient. Kale looked at her, and his smile was gentle. Maybe, but it feels good. You should try it sometime without the sarcasm. I will consider it, she said, but she stayed there, watching the stars with him until the shift change cycle dimmed the lights. That night, Lysara slept fitfully. The dream came again. The white fire of the neural resonance. She was back in the corridor of the relay station, her hands glowing with healing light, pressed against Kale's chest. But in the dream, there was no wound. There was only skin. She felt the beat of his heart under her palm, steady and strong. She felt the heat of him. And she felt a surge of emotion that had no name in her language, a fierce, protective tenderness that terrified her. In the dream, she did not pull away. She leaned in. She let herself want him. She woke with a gasp, her body flushed, her sheets tangled around her legs. Pathological, she hissed at the darkness. You are compromised, Lysara. She threw off the covers and stalked to the training bay. She needed to hit something. She programmed the holographic emitters for a level 5 swarm scenario, multiple assailants, variable gravity. For an hour, she was a blur of motion. She tore through the holographic soldiers, her bio-whip cracking like thunder, her movements precise and lethal. But the anger wouldn't burn off. You are telegraphing your left hook. Lysara spun around. Kale stood in the entrance, watching her. He was wearing loose workout pants and a tank top, his arms crossed. I do not telegraph, she snapped. You do when you are angry, Kale said, stepping onto the mats. You are dropping your shoulder. Here, let me show you. He moved into a fighting stance. Lysara narrowed her eyes. You want to spar? With me? I will break you. Gentle, Kyle grinned. Computer, adjust simulation. 2 combatants. 0G randomizer enabled. The gravity vanished. They kicked off the floor simultaneously, meeting in the center of the room in a clash of limbs. It was fast, brutal and oddly graceful. Lysara struck with the precision of a scalpel. Kale fought like a street brawler, all elbows and dirty feints. She blocked a knee strike, spinning him around. He used the momentum to swing behind her, locking his arm around her neck. She flipped backward, breaking the hold, and they drifted apart, bouncing off the walls. "You are slow," she taunted, launching herself off the ceiling. "You are predictable," he countered, ducking under her kick. The simulation shifted. Gravity pulsed, then cut out completely. They collided in midair, a tangle of limbs. Lysara grabbed his wrist to pin him. Kale caught her waist to stop her leverage. They froze. They were floating in the center of the room, spinning slowly. Her legs were wrapped around one of his, her arm locked against his chest. His hands were gripping her waist, holding her close. Their faces were inches apart. Lysara could feel his breath on her cheek, warm and quick. She could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the dilation of his pupils. Her own heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a sudden, vertiginous pull. It was the dream made real. She looked at his mouth. It would be so easy. Just a shift of weight, a closing of the distance. She leaned in, her eyes fluttering shut. "Lysara," Kyle whispered, his voice rough. The sound of her name snapped the cord. She jerked back as if burned, shoving him away hard. She hit the wall and scrambled for the door control, restoring gravity with a harsh slam. "End simulation," she barked. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. "We dock in 1 hour. Get dressed." She fled the room, leaving Kale standing on the mats, watching the empty door with a look of complicated longing. Unity Prime was an assault on the senses. The station was a massive torus spinning in the dark, a neon jewel of commerce and diplomacy. Inside, the streets were a crushing tide of biology and technology. Humans in synth silk walked alongside towering insectoid traders. Smells of roasting meats clashed with the ozone tang of charging stations. Lysara guided Kale through the crowd. He was wearing a biotech mask that altered the structure of his face, widening his jaw and changing his eye color to a dull green. A false ID chip broadcasted his identity as Jonas Vane, consultant. Lysara walked beside him, her hood up, her eyes scanning for threats. Holographic statues of the council leaders, the very people she now knew were traitors, loomed over the plazas, their benevolent smiles 50 feet high. Propaganda screens blared messages of unity through strength and vigilance against sedition. "Subtle," Kale muttered, glancing at a poster depicting a heroic soldier crushing a shadowy terrorist. "I think that terrorist is supposed to be me." "The chin is wrong," Lysara murmured. "Yours is weaker." "Ouch! I thought we were bonding." They turned down a narrow alleyway, away from the main promenade. The neon here was flickering and dirty, advertising black market cybernetics and illicit memory dens. "We are meeting him here?" Lysara asked, wrinkling her nose at the smell of stagnant water. "Jax likes the ambiance," Kale said. He stopped at a heavy steel door marked with a warning symbol. He knocked, a rhythmic, syncopated beat. The slot slid open, a mechanical eye whirred, focusing on them. "We don't buy Girl Scout cookies," a voice crackled. "Open the door, Jax," Kale said, "before I tell your mother about the incident on Rigel 7. The door hissed open. Jax stood there, grinning. He was a human, short and wiry, with a shock of electric blue hair and a mechanical left arm that looked like it had been scavenged from a construction loader. It was oversized, rusted, and whirring with questionable servos. "Kale!" Jax roared, grabbing him in a bear hug with his organic arm. "You old ghost, I thought you were dead. Or worse, married." He pulled back, looking at Lysara. His eyebrows shot up. And who is this vision of terrifying beauty? Wait. Silver hair, violet eyes. Looks like she wants to peel my skin off. This is the Huntress, the one who has been trying to mount you on a wall for 15 years. Lysara, she introduced herself icily. And I prefer taxidermy. Jax let out a bark of laughter. I love her. Kale, you finally got caught by your dream woman. I told you it would happen. Lysara rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth quirked. We need your help, Jax. We need to break into the central data vault. Jax's grin widened. Suicide mission? High security? No payment? I'm in. But I get to drive the getaway car. The infiltration was a masterpiece of improvisation. The central data vault was a fortress of black durasteel located in the station's administrative core. Jax got them in the front door disguised as a sanitation maintenance crew, using a nano-swarm emitter to rewrite their ID tags in real time. Just act like you belong, Jax whispered over the comms as they pushed a grav cart down the pristine hallway. And try not to look like you are plotting treason. I always look like this, Lysara muttered, adjusting her technician's jumpsuit. It was tight, and she felt ridiculous without her armor. They reached the perimeter of the vault. Cloaked drones hovered in the air, scanning for heartbeats. Kyle pulled a small device from his boot, a localized frequency jammer. 3 seconds, Kyle signaled. He activated the jammer. The drone stuttered. In that window, Lysara moved. She uncoiled her bio-whip, which she had coiled around her waist like a belt. She snapped it forward not to strike, but to connect. The living tendrils jacked directly into the door's access port. Bypass it, she ordered the weapon. Interface mode. The whip pulsed with light, reading the door's encryption. Lysara's mind merged with the code, a chaotic stream of data. Hurry up, princess, Jax hissed, watching the corridor. Guard patrol incoming, 2 heavies. Don't rush, Art, Lysara gritted out. The lock clicked. The heavy door slid open. They slipped inside just as the patrol turned the corner. The interior of the vault was a cavern of silent, humming servers. Rows of data crystals stretched into the darkness, bathed in blue light. Jackpot, Kale said. Jax, connect to the main terminal. Find the connection between Counselor Varen and the attack on Typhon. Jax plugged his mechanical arm directly into the console. His fingers spun, interfacing with the system. Searching. Searching. Got it. Money trails. Comm logs. It is all here. Varen authorized the weapons shipment to the Black Sun mercenaries. Dig deeper, Lysara said, her voice tight. Search for Project Chimera. Kale looked at her. What is that? Just search. Jax tapped a few more commands. His face paled. Whoa, Lysara, you might not want to see this. Put it on the screen, she commanded. A holographic file materialized. It was a video log, dated 20 years ago. It showed a young Lysara, barely a child, strapped to a chair in a sterile white room. Doctors in council uniforms were injecting her with serums, flashing images on a screen in front of her eyes. Images of Kale, images of destruction. A voiceover played, Counselor Varen's voice. Subject shows high aptitude for neuro-linguistic programming. The vengeance narrative is taking hold. We are shaping the perfect weapon. She will not just hunt the target. She will be defined by the hunt. Lysara stared at the screen. Her breath hitched. It was not just an oath, she whispered, her voice shattering. It was conditioning. They built me. They put the hate inside me. She stumbled back, hitting a server rack. The realization was a physical blow. Her entire life, her rage, her purpose, her grief. It was all a script written by old men in a dark room. Lysara, Kyle stepped toward her. Don't, she cried, backing away. Don't look at me. She turned and ran, disappearing into the maze of servers. "Kyle, go," Jax said, his voice serious. "I'll finish the download. Go get her." Kale found her in a small, secluded alcove at the back of the vault. She was slumped against the wall, her knees drawn to her chest, her face buried in her hands. She was shaking. "Lysara," Kyle said gently, kneeling beside her. She looked up. Her eyes were red, wild with anguish. "You knew, didn't you?" "I suspected," Kyle admitted. "I knew they manipulated you. I didn't know how deep it went." "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, grabbing the front of his jumpsuit. "Why didn't you try harder? 15 years, Kyle. You let me chase you. You let me live this lie." "Because I was afraid," Kale shouted back, his own control snapping. "I was afraid that if I stopped running, you would kill me before I could speak. I was afraid that even if you believed me, the truth would break you, like it is doing right now." "You should have tried," she screamed, hitting his chest with her fist. "You owed me that." "I know." Kyle caught her wrists. "I know, and I am sorry. I am so sorry." They stared at each other, breathing hard. The anger, the grief, the years of wasted time, it all boiled over. Lysara looked at his mouth. The hate was gone, replaced by a desperate, starving need to feel something real, something that wasn't a lie. She surged forward. Their lips met in a crash of desperation. It wasn't a gentle kiss, and it was rough, clumsy, frantic. It was the collision of two planets. Lysara's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. Kyle's arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her, pressing her against the server bank. She tasted of salt and fury. He tasted of forgiveness. For a moment, the universe narrowed down to the friction of their bodies, the heat of their skin. There were no councils, no lies, no missions, just Kale and Lysara, finally closing the distance. Whoop, whoop, whoop! The alarm blared, a deafening klaxon that shook the floor. Red lights began to strobe. They broke apart, chests heaving, eyes wide. "Guys!" Jax's voice screamed over the comms. "We have a situation. They tracked the download. Security is breaching the door in 10 seconds. Terrible timing for first kisses, by the way." Lysara looked at Kyle. Her lips were swollen, her eyes bright. For the first time in 15 years, she looked completely free. "We have to go," Kale said, grabbing her hand. "Lead the way," she said. They sprinted back to the main console. Jax was already packing up. "I got it all. Let's move!" The main doors exploded inward. Armored guards poured into the vault, plasma rifles firing. "Go right!" Lysara shouted. She snapped her whip, snagging a guard by the ankle and yanking him off his feet. She spun, using his body as a shield against the incoming fire. Kale vaulted over a console, firing the stun pistol Jax had given him. They moved in perfect sync. Kale covered her blind spots. She cleared the path ahead. It was a dance of violence, but this time, they were dancing to the same rhythm. "Clear!" Kale shouted, blasting the lock on a maintenance hatch. They dove through, Jax bringing up the rear, cackling maniacally as he tossed a smoke grenade behind them. They sprinted through the maintenance tunnels, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. "Where are we going?" Kale yelled. "Diplomatic hangars," Lysara shouted back. "My ship is too far and we need a ride." They burst out onto a high catwalk overlooking the main hangar bay. A sleek, gold-plated diplomatic shuttle was prepping for takeoff. "That one," Jax pointed. "It's garish. I like it." They jumped from the catwalk, landing on the roof of the shuttle just as it began to hover. Lysara cut through the hatch with her blade. They dropped into the cockpit, startling the alien pilot. "Out!" Lysara commanded, pointing her whip. The pilot didn't argue. He scrambled out the airlock. Jax jumped into the pilot's seat. "Buckle up, kids, Daddy's driving." He punched the throttle. The shuttle rocketed out of the bay, smashing through the atmospheric shield and streaking into the black behind them. Unity Prime was in chaos. Kale slumped into the co-pilot seat, gasping for air. He looked over at Lysara. She was wiping soot from her face, her hair a wild mess. She looked at him and started to laugh. It was a breathless, incredulous sound. "What?" Kale asked, grinning. "You are a terrible influence," she said. "I am a traitor. I just stole a diplomatic shuttle, and I have never felt better." Kale reached out and took her hand. She squeezed it back, hard. "Welcome to the Resistance, Lysara," he said. On the dashboard console, a news alert flashed. Lysara's face was plastered across the screen, labeled Enemy of the State. She looked at it, then at Kale, and shrugged. "Let them come," she said. "I'm ready." The diplomatic shuttle they had stolen was fast, but it was not designed for stealth. To survive, they had made a desperate rendezvous in deep space, transferring back to the Nightbloom, Lysara's hunter vessel, before scuttling the stolen yacht to cover their tracks. Now, the Nightbloom drifted in the obsidian shadow of a rogue planet, a homeless world cast adrift from its star eons ago. The planet was a sphere of absolute blackness, visible only by the way it blotted out the star field behind it. Faint, ghostly auroras danced around its equator, generated by a dying magnetic core. It was a graveyard world, silent and cold, the perfect place for 3 fugitives to disappear. Inside the ship, the bioluminescent lighting had been dimmed to a low, conservation mode amber. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. They were no longer just a hunter and her quarry. They were the most wanted beings in 2 sectors. Lysara stood in her quarters. The room was sparse, a reflection of a life lived on the hunt. She looked at her reflection in the polished metal bulkhead. The woman staring back was wearing the ceremonial armor of the High Huntress, layered plates of shifting nano-weave, engraved with the history of her kills. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, and it was a lie. Slowly, deliberately, she began to strip it off. She unlatched the pauldrons, letting them clang to the floor. She deactivated the kinetic shielding mesh. Piece by piece, she dismantled the identity that had been constructed for her since she was a child. When the last piece of armor fell, she stood in her undersuit, shivering slightly in the recycled air. She rummaged through a crate of supplies Jax had dragged on board. She found a pair of rough, heavy cargo trousers and a gray mechanic's tunic, human clothes, functional and ugly. She pulled them on. The fabric was coarse against her skin, lacking the fluid response of her alien tech, but it felt honest. She tied her silver hair back with a simple strip of cloth, exposing her face completely. The door chimed. "Enter," she said. Kyle stepped inside. He stopped dead. He had seen her armored. He had seen her bloody. And he had seen her in the formal robes of her royal house. He had never seen her like this. She looked smaller in the baggy clothes, less like a mythological figure of vengeance and more like a woman who was tired of fighting. The vulnerability of it hit him harder than a physical blow. "You changed," Kale said, his voice quiet. Lysara looked down at her hands, unadorned by gauntlets. The armor was heavy. I did not realize how heavy until I took it off. "It suits you," Kale said, stepping closer. "You look like a refugee," she offered with a dry smile. "Like you," he corrected. "Just Lysara." She held his gaze, and for a moment, the silence between them was not tense, but heavy with unspoken things. She was still breathtaking, the violet fire of her eyes undimmed, but the barrier of her station was gone. "Come," she said, breaking the moment before it could overwhelm her. Jax has finished decoding the files. The central console in the mess hall was buried under a holographic projection of the galaxy. Red lines connected star systems like surgical incisions. Jax sat with his feet up on the table, his mechanical arm whirring as he rotated a complex 3D model of a financial network. "It is worse than we thought," Jax said, chewing on a nutrient stick. "Or better, depending on how much you enjoy apocalyptic conspiracy theories." Kale leaned over the table. "Show us." "The Council of Nine isn't just a political alliance," Jax explained, highlighting nodes on the map. "It is an investment firm. Look here." They shorted the stock on agricultural terraforming machinery 3 days before they ordered the attack on the Typhon megacity. They knew the attack would destroy the food stores. They made trillions in 4 hours. "They manufacture crises," Lysara murmured, tracing the red lines. "They break the world so they can sell the glue to fix it." "Exactly," Jax said. "And look at the voting records. Every time a peace treaty gained traction, a terror attack happens. Every time a trade embargo is about to lift, a diplomat is assassinated. It is clockwork. They have been running the galaxy like a simulation for 50 years. "And us?" Kyle asked. "Where do we fit in?" "You were the boogeyman," Jax pointed at Kale. "The human traitor, the chaos agent. They needed a face for the fear. And you, Princess." Jax looked at Lysara with uncharacteristic seriousness. "You were the vengeance, the proof that the system works. Look, the brave Huntress is chasing the bad man. Go back to sleep. Citizens, justice is being served." Lysara felt a cold sickness in her stomach. "It was all theater." "Theater with real bodies," Kale said grimly. "There is something else," Jax said. He tapped a key, and a string of code floated to the center. This phrase, "Nine lie here," it appears in the headers of their private communication channels. It is not just a slogan, it is a location. "A coordinate?" Lysara asked. "Partial coordinates." Jax nodded. "Every time they send a kill order, the signal routes through a dead zone in the Graveway sector. I can't pinpoint it yet, but it is out there. A central hub." Jax leaned back, his eyes gleaming with a smuggler's avarice. "Here is the thing, friends. This data, it is worth more than a Dyson sphere. There are factions, corporate rivals, outer rim warlords who would pay absolute fortunes for this leverage. We could sell 1/10 of this, buy new identities, own a private moon, and drink mimosa nebulas for the rest of our lives." "No," Kale said instantly. Jax threw up his hands. "Hear me out. We are 3 people against a galactic shadow government. If we try to fight them, we die. If we sell the data, we survive, and we get rich." "If we sell it," Kale said, his voice hard, "then the buyers just use it to become the new council. Nothing changes, the wars keep happening. The lies keep spreading." "So what?" Jax countered. "We aren't paladins, Kale. I'm a thief. You're a spy. She's a killer. We don't save galaxies, we save our own skins." "Not this time," Kyle said. "This information belongs to everyone. The families of the people they killed on Aurea, the citizens starving on the rim worlds because of their trade blockades. They deserve the truth, freely given." Jax groaned. "You are pathologically noble. It is disgusting." He looked at Lysara. "Princess, talk sense into him. You understand leverage. We sell the data. We get power. We use that power to hurt them. That is how the game is played." Lysara looked from Jax to Kale. She had been raised in the Spire, taught that information was currency, that trust was a weakness, and that leverage was the only law of the universe. Jax's plan was logical. It was safe. It was how her mother would have handled it. But then she looked at Kale. She saw the man who had refused to plant a bomb 15 years ago. the man who had taken a plasma bolt for her. "The game is rigged, Jax," Lysara said softly. "If we play by their rules, we have already lost." Jax stared at her, mouth open. "Et tu, brute? They really did brainwash you?" "No," Lysara said, standing up. "I am just done being a weapon. We release the data, all of it, to every newsfeed, every planetary grid, every comm-buoy. We burn their shadows away with light." Kale smiled at her, and it was a look of such profound pride that Lysara had to look away to hide the flush rising in her cheeks. Later, during the ship's quiet cycle, Kyle found Lysara in the galley. She was staring suspiciously at a mug of steaming black liquid. "It is coffee," Kale said, moving to the fabricator. "Beans, water, heat. It won't bite." "It smells like burnt earth," Lysara noted. She took a sip and grimaced, her nose wrinkling. "It tastes like despair." "It is an acquired taste," Kale laughed. He grabbed a foil-wrapped ration bar from a pile Jax had left. It was labeled in Lysara's native script. "What is this?" "Moss cake," she said. "Spiced with capsaicin and sulfur salt. A delicacy." Kale unwrapped it. It looked like a brick of green algae. He took a confident bite. 2 seconds later, his eyes bulged. He doubled over, coughing violently, pounding his chest. "Water!" he wheezed. "Why is it vibrating in my throat?" Lysara watched him, a rare, genuine amusement dancing in her eyes. She handed him a water pouch. "The sulfur reacts with human saliva. It creates a mild exothermic reaction." "Mild?" Kale gasped, chugging the water. "I think I just ate a grenade." "You are weak," she teased, taking another sip of the bitter coffee. "My people eat this for breakfast." "Your people have stomachs lined with lead," Kale croaked, wiping tears from his eyes. He leaned against the counter, recovering. The galley was small, forcing them into close proximity. The humor faded into a comfortable silence. Lysara looked down at her mug. "I am drinking it," she said quietly. "The coffee?" "Yes, it is terrible, but—" She hesitated. "Every time I tracked you to a new safe house, I would find the dregs of it. The smell of it reminds me of the chase. But now, sitting here, it reminds me that the chase is over." Kyle reached out, his hand brushing hers on the countertop. "It doesn't have to be terrible. Try adding sugar." "I do not want sugar," Lysara said, looking up at him. "I want to remember the bitterness, so I don't forget what it cost to get here." Their fingers interlaced. It was a small gesture, tentative and terrifyingly intimate. The alarm did not wail. It hissed, a sharp intake of breath from the ship's sensors. "Hull breach," the AI whispered. "Sector 4, stealth signature detected." Lysara dropped the mug. It shattered on the floor. "They found us," she hissed. "How?" Kyle drew his weapon. "We scuttled the shuttle. We were dark." "Quantum tags," Lysara realized, her face paling. "The ones in my armor. I took it off. But the residue. Or maybe they tracked the Nightbloom's engine signature. It doesn't matter." Explosions rocked the ship. Not the loud boom of cannons, but the muffled thump of breaching charges. "Jax!" Kale yelled into his comms. "Engine room! Now!" They sprinted into the corridor. The hallway ahead shimmered. A grenade sailed through the solid wall, ghosting through the metal before solidifying in midair. "Phasing tech!" Lysara shouted, tackling Kale into an alcove. The grenade detonated, unleashing a pulse of gravimetric distortion that crushed the bulkhead opposite them like a soda can. Figures materialized from the smoke. They wore sleek, faceless helmets and armor that shifted color to match the walls. They moved with utter silence. "Black Ops," Lysara breathed. My people's shadow division. She recognized the tactics, the efficiency. These were the ghosts that the Huntress caste told stories about to scare recruits. Lysara uncoiled her whip, her eyes glowing violet. Get to the escape pods. I will hold them. No! Kale fired blindly around the corner. There are too many. We need to vent the section. They have mag boots, Lysara countered, snapping her whip to sever the head of a charging operative. They will stick to the hull. Jax came skidding around the corner, his mechanical arm sparking. They cut the power to the engines. We are dead in the water. The secondary launch bay, Kyle said. There is a maintenance skiff. It is too small for 3. Lysara looked at him. Kale, no. Jax, take her. Kale shoved Jax toward Lysara. I am not leaving you, Lysara screamed, grabbing his arm. You have to. Kale looked at her, his eyes fierce. You are the only one who can unlock the data files. They are bio-coded to your DNA now. If you get captured, the truth dies. If I get captured, I'm just a spy. Kale, go! He didn't wait for her to agree. He slammed his hand onto the bulkhead control panel, sealing the blast door between them. Kale! Lysara threw herself against the door, pounding on the thick metal. Through the reinforced window, she saw him turn to face the hallway of smoke. He raised his pistol, standing alone against the advancing shadows. Run! Lysara! His voice crackled over the comms one last time. Then the Black Ops team swarmed him. She saw the flash of stun batons, the arc of electricity. Kale fought. He dropped 2 of them, but there were too many. They buried him under a pile of armored bodies. Come on, princess! Jax grabbed her belt, dragging her away. Don't waste it, move! Lysara stared at the window for 1 second longer, watching them drag Kale's unconscious body away. A sound tore from her throat, half scream, half sob, before she turned and ran. They escaped in the maintenance skiff, a rusted bucket of bolts that barely made it to the atmosphere of the rogue planet. They hid the skiff in a deep canyon of jagged obsidian, powering down all systems, in the cramped cockpit, lit only by the faint aurora overhead. Lysara watched the broadcast. The Black Ops team had not kept their victory secret. They were broadcasting on an open channel, a message meant specifically for her. The holographic image showed Kale. He was beaten, bloodied, kneeling on the deck of a massive warship. The ship was the Terminus, a mobile execution platform used for high-profile traitors. A voiceover boomed, "The terrorist Kale has been apprehended. He is identified as the mastermind behind the corruption of the Huntress Lysara. His execution is scheduled for the next rotation. Justice will be absolute." Lysara sat in the dark, her hands gripping the controls until her knuckles turned white. "They are baiting you," Jax said softly from the co-pilot seat. "They know you are watching. They want you to come for him so they can kill you both." "I know," Lysara said. Her voice was dead calm. "We have the data," Jax reminded her. "We could flee to the outer rim, broadcast it from a safe distance. Exposing the 9 is the mission, right? That is what Kale wanted. That is why he locked the door." Lysara looked at the image of Kale. She remembered his hand on hers in the galley. She remembered him falling from the sky on Typhon to save her. She remembered the way he looked at her when she wore the ugly human clothes. Her old programming, the voice of the spire whispered in her ear. "The mission is everything. Sacrifices are necessary. One life is nothing against the stability of the galaxy." But then a new voice spoke, her own. "Justice without compassion is just cruelty with a better name." If she left him to die to save the galaxy, she became exactly what the 9 were, a calculator of acceptable losses. She would not build a new world on the bones of the man she loved. "No," Lysara said. "No! Jax asked. "We are not running." Lysara turned to him. "We are going to get him back." Jax looked at her, then sighed, rubbing his metal temple. "I knew you were going to say that. We are going to die, but at least it will be a funny story." The terminus hung in orbit like a hammer waiting to fall. It was a fortress of gunmetal and misery. The infiltration plan was insane. It relied on the one thing the Council did not expect: for the Huntress to degrade herself. They docked a stolen supply pod at the waste processing airlock. Lysara used a bioinjector to temporarily swell the tissue of her face, closing one eye and distorting her cheekbone. She applied a chemical agent to her skin that mimicked a virulent, contagious rash common in the lower decks. Jax, wearing a ragged prisoner's jumpsuit, looked at her and winced. "I am not getting paid enough to look this ugly. You look like you licked a reactor core." "Shut up and put the cuffs on me," Lysara growled, her voice raspy from the vocal cord dampener. They played the part of bounty hunters delivering a bounty, or rather. Jax played the hunter, and Lysara played the diseased spice addict he had caught for a lower deck reward. They bluffed their way past 3 checkpoints. The guards, repulsed by Lysara's appearance and Jax's obnoxious behavior, waved them through just to get rid of the smell. "Cell block A9, Jax whispered, checking a stolen datapad. "Maximum security." They reached the cell. 2 heavy guards stood watch. Lysara slumped against the wall, moaning theatrically about spiders in her blood. "Stand back," the guard ordered Jax. "Prisoner transfer requires authorization." "Authorization is right here." Jax grinned. He activated a sonic emitter in his mechanical arm. A high-frequency screech dropped the guard to his knees, clutching his ears. Lysara stopped moaning. She straightened up, her movement blurring. She drove her palm into the second guard's throat, crushing his windpipe. Then spun and kicked the first guard into the bulkhead with enough force to dent the metal. It was over in 3 seconds. Lysara grabbed the guard's keycard. She swiped the lock. The force field dropped. Kale was chained to the wall. He looked terrible. His left eye was swollen shut, his lips split. He looked up as the door opened, expecting the executioner. Lysara stepped in. She injected herself with the counteragent, and her face began to rapidly deflate, returning to its normal, stunning geometry. She knelt beside him. Her hands trembled as she reached for the mag locks on his wrists. "You," Kyle whispered, a bruised smile touching his lips. "You are insane." "I am punctual," she corrected, her voice thick with emotion. She unlocked the collar around his neck, the same model she had put on him days ago. It clattered to the floor. She touched his bruised face, her thumb brushing away a streak of dried blood. Tears, bright and unbidden, welled in her violet eyes. "You are late," Kyle rasped, leaning into her touch. "My appointment was for noon." "Traffic was murder," she whispered. She pulled him up, wrapping her arms around him. He groaned in pain but held her just as tight. Clang, clang, clang. The ship-wide alarm hammered through the deck. "They know!" Jax shouted from the hallway. "We have company, a lot of company." "Can you run?" Lysara asked Kale. "Watch me," Kale said. They burst into the corridor. A squad of heavy troopers was turning the far corner, weapons spinning up. "Maintenance chute!" Jax yelled, blasting a grate off the wall. They dove in, scrambling down a narrow, greasy tunnel filled with pipes. They slid down 2 levels, landing in a junction room near the reactor core. They sealed the hatch behind them, jamming it with a metal bar. Outside, heavy boots thundered. Someone started cutting through the door with a plasma torch. Sparks showered the room. They were trapped. "This is a dead end," Jax said, checking the schematics on the wall. "No exit." Lysara looked at the glowing reactor conduit humming in the center of the room. Then she looked at Kyle. They were dirty, bloody, and cornered, and they were alive. "I am sorry," Lysara said, her voice steady. "I dragged you into this." "You didn't drag me anywhere," Kyle said. He stepped close to her, ignoring the sparks raining down. "I chose this. I chose you." Lysara looked into his eyes. The last wall inside her crumbled. "I do not know how to be anything but a huntress," she confessed, the words rushing out. "I do not know who I am if I am not chasing something." "Then chase tomorrow," Kyle said. "With me." He kissed her. It wasn't fast or frantic like the kiss in the vault. It was slow. It was deep. It tasted of blood and ozone and absolute certainty. It was a promise made in the face of the end. Lysara melted into him, her hands gripping the back of his neck, anchoring herself to the only truth she had left. "Okay," Jax interrupted, his voice breaking the spell. "As touching as this is, I would prefer not to die while being the third wheel. I have an idea." Lysara and Kale broke apart, breathing hard. "The reactor," Jax pointed. "If we overload the magnetic containment field, it won't blow up the ship, but it will trigger an emergency scram. The whole ship will lose power for 5 minutes while the safety systems reboot. Gravity, sensors, door locks, everything goes dark." "And the radiation?" Kyle asked. "Minimal," Jax shrugged. "We might lose some hair, but in the confusion we can reach the escape pods." "Do it," Lysara commanded. Jax jacked his arm into the reactor control. "Hold on to your butts." He surged the power. The hum of the reactor rose to a scream. The lights flared blindingly bright, then died. The gravity cut out. In the sudden pitch blackness and 0G, the cutting torch at the door sputtered and died. The ship groaned as it drifted. "Go!" Lysara shouted. They pushed off the walls, floating through the darkness like ghosts. They navigated the labyrinth of corridors by touch and memory, passing confused, shouting guards who were tumbling helplessly in the dark. They reached the escape pod bay. Lysara manually cranked the door open. They shoved Jax in, then Kale. Lysara climbed in last, slamming the hatch just as the emergency lights flickered back on. "Launch!" The pod blasted away from the terminus, a tiny speck of metal disappearing into the vastness of the rogue planet's shadow. Behind them, the massive execution ship drifted, crippled and silent, safe aboard the recovered Nightbloom. Hours later, Kale sat in the medbay, patched up and clean. Lysara stood by the viewport, watching the stars streak by. "We exposed them," Jax said, walking in with a data pad. "The reactor overload fried their internal firewalls. When the systems rebooted, our data packet rode the surge out to the local buoys. The footage of the execution order, the council signatures, it is all out there. The net is blowing up." "It is a start," Kale said. Lysara turned. She held the data shard they had recovered from the relay. "The final coordinate," she said. "Jax decoded it while you were in the autodock." "Where is it?" Kale asked. "The Graveway," Lysara said. "Deep in the unstable zone. A cemetery station." Kale's face went still. "A cemetery station?" "Rumored to house the remains of the forgotten leaders," Lysara read. "A place where the old war heroes were laid to rest." Kale stood up, walking to the window. His reflection ghosted over the stars. "9 lie here," he whispered. He realized it then. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't a code. It was literal. "They aren't ruling from a palace," Kale said, his voice cold. "They are ruling from a grave." Lysara stepped up beside him, her hand finding his. "Then we go to the graveyard, and we bring a shovel." The ship banked. turning away from the civilized worlds, and plunged into the dark, twisting currents of the fold stream, heading for the place where the dead refused to sleep. The night bloom shuddered as it dropped out of fold stream, the reality stabilizers screaming in protest. They had arrived. The view outside the cockpit was a vision of beautiful, silent death. A white dwarf star burned in the center of the system, a dense, blinding point of light that cast long, hard shadows. Orbiting it was the cemetery station, a colossal ring of Gothic spires and interconnected modules that looked more like a cathedral than a space station. Hundreds of smaller pods floated in the station's wake, tomb-like structures glowing with a sickly, pale green luminescence. They drifted in perfect silence, a procession of the dead marching around a dying star. "It is a mausoleum," Lysara whispered, standing at the viewport. Her reflection was ghost-like against the stark light of the dwarf star. She wore her mismatched refugee clothes, but she carried herself with the lethal grace of a queen. "It is a vault," Kale corrected, checking his weapon. "And we are here to crack it." As they approached the docking ring, the ship's sensors began to glitch. Static washed over the screens. Audio channels crackled with phantom whispers, voices speaking in dead languages, laughing, crying. "Atmospheric scrubbers are picking up traces of mnemonic particles," Jack said, tapping his mechanical fingers against his console. "This whole place is saturated with psychoreactive gas. It is like the air itself is remembering things." "Preservation tech," Kale said. "They didn't just want to keep the bodies, they wanted to keep the echoes." A spectral figure, a woman in a flowing gown, flickered into existence on the bridge, walking through the command chair before vanishing into mist. "Okay," Jack said, his voice tightening. "That is officially too spooky for my pay grade. I am staying on the ship. I will keep the engines hot and the getaway route clear. If you two die in there without paying me, I promise I will haunt you personally. I will be the most annoying poltergeist in history." "Deal," Kyle said, clapping Jax on the shoulder. Lysara turned to Kale. "Ready?" "Always." They moved to the airlock. The docking clamps engaged with a bone-shaking thud. The airlock cycled, hissing open to reveal a corridor of dark metal and vaulted ceilings. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and dust. They stepped inside. The station was a labyrinth of silence. They walked down long halls lined with vertical stasis sarcophagi, their footsteps echoing too loudly. Each glass pod contained a figure, human, alien, some species long extinct. Nameplates glittered in the dim light: admirals, CEOs, planetary governors, people who had been declared dead decades ago with full state honors. "I remember his funeral," Lysara said, stopping before a pod containing a gray-skinned diplomat. "I was an initiate. The weeping lasted for 3 days. He didn't die," Kale said grimly. "He retired. To this." "Why?" Lysara asked. "Why fake their deaths to sleep in a box?" "Because the dead have no oversight," Kyle said. "They have no term limits, no laws. They can pull the strings from the dark without anyone looking for the puppeteer." They reached the central chamber. It was a vast circular room with a domed ceiling that looked directly up at the white dwarf. In the center of the room, 9 obsidian sarcophagi stood in a circle, connected by thick cables to a pulsating core of alien technology. The core hummed with a low, throbbing beat that felt like a headache behind the eyes. On the floor, etched into the metal in glowing glyphs of both human and high alien script, was the phrase, "9 lie here." Lysara read it aloud. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and final. 9 lie here. Kyle walked to a control pedestal at the edge of the circle. He brushed dust from the interface. "Let's wake them up." He keyed in a sequence. The core flared. The hum rose to a shriek. Above the 9 sarcophagi, holographic avatars shimmered into existence. They were immense, translucent projections of faces, some human, some alien. They looked down at the intruders not with anger, but with an amused, ancient contempt. "Welcome," the central avatar spoke. It was a human woman with eyes like cold iron. "We have been expecting you, Kyle, and you, Huntress." "The Council of 9, Lysara said, her hand tightening on her weapon. "You are the ghosts." "We are the architects," an alien avatar corrected, its voice like grinding stones. "We are the stability you crave. We orchestrated the Aurea massacre to prevent a trade war that would have starved billions. We conditioned you, Lysara, to give the galaxy a symbol of justice to believe in. We kept Kale running to give them a devil to fear." "You killed my mother," Lysara said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "We removed an obstacle," the woman said, "and in doing so, we gave you a purpose. Look at you. You are magnificent, a perfect weapon forged in the fire of our design." The avatars leaned in, their voices blending into a seductive chorus in Lysara's mind. "Join us, Huntress. Kill him. Kill the traitor Kale. Do it here, now, on the live feed. We will restore your honor. We will erase the warrant. You will take your place as the 10th pillar of our order. You will have power. You will have certainty. You will never be lost again." It was a terrifyingly tempting offer. Lysara felt the pull of it, the desire to go back to being the hero, to having a clear mission, to belonging to something greater than herself. She looked at Kyle. He had stepped back into the circle of sarcophagi. He wasn't looking at the avatars. He was looking at her. He had lowered his weapon. "Kyle," she whispered. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, metallic marker. He placed it gently on the lid of the sarcophagus nearest to him. "What are you doing?" the female avatar demanded, her digital brow furrowing. "Marking the graves," Kale said softly. He moved to the next one, placing another marker. "I have been busy, Lysara. While you were hunting me, I was hunting them." He looked at the avatars. "You think you are safe here? You think because your bodies are frozen, you are untouchable? I found your proxies. I found the clones you used to walk the real world. I killed Counselor Varen in a hotel room in the core systems 3 years ago. I killed Admiral Hax on his private yacht last winter." The avatars flickered. The arrogance vanished, replaced by confusion. "He is lying," the alien avatar growled. "We are eternal." "Are you?" Kale asked. He placed the 8th marker. "Check your connection latency. Check the signal decay. Why do you think you have been waking up slower lately? Why do you think the commands take longer to execute?" He stopped at the 9th sarcophagus. It was empty. The glass was cracked. Kale turned to Lysara. He stood in the center of the 9, the weight of 15 years of running, fighting, and bleeding hanging on his shoulders. He looked tired. He looked at peace. "You're on time," Kale said, his voice echoing in the silent cathedral. "I told the Huntress who chased me 15 years. 9 lie here. Yours is next." Lysara froze. The words hit her like a physical blow. "Yours is next," Kale repeated. "That is the choice, Lysara. That has always been the choice. You can be the next lie they bury here. You can be the beautiful, tragic Huntress who served the system until she died. Or you can be the one who ends it." He spread his hands. He was completely defenseless. "I am done running. If you want to be their weapon, do it. But I won't fight you." The silence stretched, thin and agonizing. The 9 screamed in her mind, "Kill him! He is a terrorist. He is the chaos. We offer you order. We offer you purpose." Lysara looked at the avatars. the cold, calculating faces of the people who had murdered her mother and turned her into a killer. Then she looked at Kale. She remembered the way he had tackled her off the balcony on Typhon. She remembered the warmth of his hand on hers in the galley. She remembered the raw, terrified honesty in his eyes when he took the plasma bolt for her. She remembered what he had told her. "We are the choices we make when the lights go out." "I am not a lie," Lysara whispered. She raised her weapon. The avatars smiled triumphantly. Kale did not flinch. Lysara spun on her heel. She didn't aim at Kale. She aimed at the pulsating core in the center of the room, the brain of the station, the anchor for the Nine's consciousness. "I am the truth," she screamed. She fired. The sonic blast slammed into the core. The machine shrieked, a sound like tearing metal and dying gods. The avatars flickered violently, their faces twisting into masks of horror. "No!" the voices roared in unison. "Kill them!" the female avatar commanded. "Activate defense protocols!" The walls of the chamber split open. Combat drones poured out, spiders of chrome and red light. Automated turrets dropped from the ceiling. "Kale!" Lysara shouted, tossing him a spare pulse pistol she had concealed. He caught it in midair. "I knew you liked me." They went back to back. The battle was a blur of violence. Lysara was a whirlwind, her whip snapping through the air, severing hydraulic lines and crushing sensors. Kale fired with methodical precision, picking off drones before they could flank them. "Cover me!" Kale yelled, sliding under a laser beam to plant an explosive charge on a power conduit. "Always!" Lysara vaulted over a sarcophagus, shielding him with her body as a turret opened fire. Her kinetic field flared, absorbing the impact. They fought not as two individuals, but as one organism. 15 years of chasing each other had taught them every move, every reflex. They moved in a perfect, deadly harmony. But there were too many drones. They were being pushed back toward the center of the circle. "We can't win this firefight," Kyle shouted over the roar of plasma fire. "We do not have to win," Lysara yelled back, decapitating a drone. "We just have to kill the signal." The core was damaged, smoking, but still active. The avatars were flickering, desperate now. "Assume direct control," the alien avatar boomed. "Initiate override. Target, the Huntress." Lysara screamed and dropped to her knees. She clutched her head. The old conditioning, the subroutines implanted in her brain as a child, flared to life. The Nine were trying to upload themselves into her mind, to use her body as a vessel. "Lysara!" Kyle dropped his gun and grabbed her shoulders. "Get out!" she gasped, her eyes rolling back, glowing with the Nine's sickly green light. "Run, Kale, they are taking me." "Not today," Kale growled. He grabbed the psychic interface crown from his belt, the one she had used on him on the ship. He jammed it onto her head and then onto his own temples. "Let them in," Kyle commanded, "and let me in too." The world dissolved. They were in the mindscape. It was a storm of gray ash and black lightning. The avatars of the Nine towered over them like titans, shadowy and immense. "You are small," the voices thundered. "You are insects. We are the galaxy." Lysara stood in the center of the storm, small and terrified, reverting to the image of the child she had been when her mother died. Kyle materialized beside her. He wasn't small. In this place, shaped by will and memory, he was a giant. He shone with a fierce golden light. "She is not alone," Kale said. He took Lysara's hand. The contact sent a shock wave through the mental landscape. Memories flooded in, not of pain or training, but of the moments they had stolen together. The laugh in the zero-G chamber, the taste of the bitter coffee, the kiss in the reactor room. Lysara looked up at him. The child image melted away. She grew, armor forming from light. But it wasn't the armor of the Huntress. It was new armor, forged from her own choices. "Get out of my head," Lysara said. Her voice was calm, but it carried the force of a supernova. "You are ours," the Nine shrieked, reaching for her with shadowy claws. "I belong to no one," Lysara declared. "And I choose him." She squeezed Kale's hand. Their wills merged, a fusion of discipline and improvisation, of alien fury and human resilience. They pushed back. A wave of pure white light exploded from them. It hit the shadowy titans, tearing them apart. The avatars screamed as they were dissolved, their consciousnesses scattered into static. "End of the line," Kale whispered. They shattered the mental construct. They woke up on the floor of the station. The core exploded. It wasn't a fire, it was a release of pent-up energy. A shockwave of pure force slammed into them, throwing them across the room. Kale hit a sarcophagus hard, the glass shattering. Lysara was thrown against the far wall. Darkness took them both. The station began to die. The gravitational stabilizers failed. The massive cathedral spires began to twist and buckle, drawn in by the terrible gravity of the white dwarf. "Kale, Lysara, answer me." The voice was tinny, distant. "Come on, you two. Don't make me come in there. I hate ghosts." "Jax," Kale groaned, rolling over. His body felt like it had been put through a grinder. The air was filled with smoke and the screech of tearing metal. He saw Lysara. She was lying a few meters away, covered in dust. She wasn't moving. "Lysara!" Kyle scrambled toward her, dragging his leg. Then he reached her, checking for a pulse. It was there, faint, but steady. She opened her eyes. They were violet again. The green glow was gone. "Did we get them?" she whispered, her voice a ruin. "We got them." Kyle smiled, blood dripping from his nose. "They are gone." The floor tilted violently. A chunk of the ceiling the size of a bus crashed down where the core had been. "Jax!" Kale shouted into his comms. "We are alive, but the floor is melting." "I see you," Jax yelled. "I am coming in hot. Do not move, or actually, do move, specifically toward the big hole in the wall." The night bloom roared into view, hovering outside the shattered dome of the central chamber. The airlock ramp extended, scraping against the buckling floor. "Go!" Kyle hauled Lysara up. They ran. The station was disintegrating around them, falling into the star. They leaped across a widening fissure in the floor. Kyle threw Lysara onto the ramp, then scrambled up after her. Jax pulled the ship away just as the central chamber collapsed, falling silently into the white fire of the star below. They lay on the deck of the airlock, gasping for air, watching the cemetery station burn, the sarcophagi, the lies, the Nine. It all spiraled down into the crushing gravity, erased from existence. Lysara reached out and took Kale's hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The chase was over. The silence in the medbay was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic chirp of the biomonitors. It was a stark contrast to the screaming metal and psychic thunder that had filled Kale's last waking moments. He opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh white light of the overhead strips. His body felt heavy, as if gravity had turned up the dial, every muscle aching with a deep, bruising fatigue. He turned his head. Lysara lay on the bio-bed next to him. She was asleep, her chest rising and falling in a slow, peaceful rhythm. The tension that had defined her face for 15 years, the furrow of the brow, the tight line of the jaw, was gone. She looked younger. She looked like the girl on the terrace before the fire. Kale sat up, groaning as his stiff joints protested. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and walked unsteadily to the viewport. Outside, the universe was ending. Or at least, A small, dark part of it was. The cemetery station was gone. In its place was a spiraling field of luminous debris, a river of shattered metal and glass flowing inexorably toward the white dwarf star. The star's gravity was tearing the wreckage apart, pulling the spires and the sarcophagi into its blinding embrace. Cale watched as a massive chunk of the central ring caught the light one last time before vanishing into the stellar fire. The tombs of the Nine were being consumed. The lies were burning. "It is beautiful," a voice whispered. Kyle turned. Lysara was sitting up, watching him. Her violet eyes were clear, the sickly green tint of the Nine's possession completely purged. "It is clean," Kyle agreed. "How do you feel?" Lysara swung her legs down, testing her weight. She grimaced, then smiled. "Like I went 12 rounds with a gravity press. But my head, it is quiet. For the first time since I was 6 years old, there are no voices, no directives, just me." The door to the medbay hissed open. Jack strode in, holding a data pad in his organic hand and a steaming mug of sludge coffee in his mechanical one. "Rise and shine, heroes." Jax grinned, though he looked exhausted. "I hope you got your beauty sleep. You have about 10 trillion messages on the answering machine." "What happened?" Kyle asked, taking the coffee. "Well," Jax leaned against the bulkhead. "When you two decided to have a psychic wrestling match with the Nine, you didn't just fry their brains. You acted as a signal booster. The interface crown was connected to the station's core, which was connected to the galactic hypercom network. You broadcast the entire fight." Lysara froze. "Broadcast? To whom?" "To everyone." Jack spread his hands wide. "To the council chambers on Prime, to the trade fleets, to the datpads of random citizens on the rim worlds. They heard everything. Princess, the Nine bragging about the massacre, the details of your conditioning, the confession that they engineered the wars for profit. You guys practically live-streamed the apocalypse." Lysara walked to the viewport, looking out at the burning debris. "They know. Everyone knows." "The truth is out," Kyle said softly. "It is really out. And the galaxy is losing its collective mind," Jax added, tapping his pad. 3 sector governors have already resigned. Admiral Hax's second-in-command just arrested the entire high command of the 7th Fleet. There are riots in the capital. People are tearing down the statues of the Nine. It is chaos out there. Kyle frowned, a shadow passing over his face. "Chaos can be dangerous. Power vacuums get filled by bad people." "Maybe," Lysara said, turning from the window. Her voice was firm. "But it is honest chaos. Better that than the orderly prison we were living in." The next 3 days were a blur of encrypted transmissions. The Nightbloom, still hiding in the fold stream currents near the gravesite, became the center of a political storm. They received offers from every faction scrambling to survive the fallout. A representative from the Trade Coalition offered them a private moon and lifetime immunity in exchange for an exclusive endorsement. A splinter group of the military offered Lysara the title of Supreme Commander if she would lead a coup to restore order. Lysara sat at the comms console, listening to a panicked plea from a high-ranking diplomat who had once signed her kill orders. "Huntress, please," the diplomat wheezed, sweat beading on his holographic forehead. "We need stability. If you return to the capital, we can frame this as a reform movement. We can protect you." "I do not need your protection," Lysara said, her voice ice-cold. "And I am not a prop for your new regime. The Nine are gone. If you want to keep your job, start serving the people instead of your bank accounts. Do not call this frequency again." She cut the feed. "That was the 5th one today," Kyle noted from the pilot's chair. "They are afraid," Lysara said. "They think power is something that is given, They do not understand that we just took it back and gave it to everyone. Are we sure we did the right thing? Kyle asked, looking at the scrolling news feeds of protests and burning government buildings. People are getting hurt. Lysara. Revolutions are messy. Surgery is messy, Lysara replied. But you do not leave the tumor in just to avoid the blood. She stood up and walked over to him. The bridge was quiet now, the hum of the ship a steady comfort. I am tired of politics, she whispered. Me too, Kyle admitted. That night, the ship felt different. The external threat was gone. The chase was over. For 15 years, their relationship had been defined by velocity, by the distance between them, by the speed of the hunt. Now, the distance was zero, and the speed was zero. They sat on the floor of the observation deck, a bottle of stolen wine between them. They were shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the drifting stars. So, Kyle said, swirling the dark liquid in his glass. What happens now? No 9, no warrants, no chase. Lysara pulled her knees to her chest. She was wearing the oversized mechanic's shirt again. I do not know. I have spent my entire life being a weapon. Someone points. I shoot. Without a target, I feel ghost limbs. I keep reaching for a sword that isn't there. I know the feeling, Kyle said. I have spent 15 years looking over my shoulder. Every time a door opens, I calculate the exit vectors. I do not know how to just sit in a room. We are broken things, Lysara said quietly. We are survivors, Kyle corrected. There is a difference. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers traced the white scars on her knuckles. Old injuries from training duels she had fought as a child. Tell me something real, Kyle said. Not a mission report, not a threat. Tell me something about Lysara. She looked at him, surprised. She thought for a long moment. I like the rain, she said softly. On Oria, before the fire. I used to sneak out to the gardens when the monsoon storms hit. My mother would be furious because I would ruin my ceremonial robes. But I loved the sound of it. It felt like the sky was washing the world clean. I wanted to be a hydrologist. I wanted to study water. Kyle smiled. A hydrologist, I can see it. You would be very intense about the pH levels. Lysara laughed, a genuine bell-like sound. And you? What did the great spy want to be? A chef, Kyle confessed. On Persephone 4, food was terrible. Paste and nutrient blocks. I used to dream about spices. I promised myself that one day I would make a meal that didn't taste like gray despair. You nearly killed me with that moss cake, Lysara teased, so you have a long way to go. They sat in the silence, letting the shared confession settle. It was terrifying, this quiet. It was easier to fight a battalion of drones than to admit to these small, fragile dreams. Kyle turned his hand so his palm pressed against hers. We can figure it out, he said. The ordinary life. We can learn it together. One boring day at a time. Lysara looked at him. The desire that had been simmering under the surface of their violence for years finally broke through, no longer held back by duty or fear. I do not want to be boring tonight, she whispered. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the reactor room. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question asked and answered in the same breath. Kale's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. She melted into him, the tension leaving her body as if a string had been cut. They moved to the cabin, the door sliding shut behind them. There was no urgency. They undressed each other with a reverence that felt almost holy, tracing the map of scars on each other's skin. Kyle kissed the plasma burn on her shoulder. Lysara ran her fingers over the neural interface ports on his spine. These were the marks of their war, and tonight they were laying down their arms. When they finally came together, it was an act of profound healing. It was the physical manifestation of the psychic bond they had shared in the station. Lysara gasped, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sensation of being held, truly held, without the expectation of violence. Kyle held her as if she were made of glass, whispering her name against her skin, promising her that he was there, that he wasn't running, that he would never run again. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, limbs heavy with a strange, exhausting peace. "This is weird," Lysara mumbled into his chest. "What is?" Kyle asked, stroking her hair. "Safety," she said. "It feels suspicious." Kyle laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Give it time. You might even learn to like sleeping with both eyes closed." The next morning, the door chime woke them. "Captain, operative, are you decent?" Jax's voice came through the intercom. "Because I have tactical updates, and I really do not want to see anything that will require therapy." Lysara groaned, pulling a pillow over her head. Kyle chuckled and grabbed his pants. "Come in, Jax," Kyle called out. The door opened. Jax walked in, took one look at the tangled sheets and the relaxed atmosphere, and smirked. "Well, well," Jax said. "I see the diplomatic negotiations were successful. You lovebirds destabilizing the galaxy wasn't enough? You had to destabilize the sleep schedule too?" "Shut up, Jax," Lysara said, sitting up and wrapping the sheet around herself. She grabbed a pillow and threw it at him. It hit him in the face with a soft thud. Jax caught it. "Violence already? Good. I was worried you had gone soft. Listen, we have a situation. Not a bad one. For once." He handed Lysara a data pad. "The border worlds," Jax said. "The ones the Nine used as testing grounds for their weapons. The governments there are collapsing, but they don't have the infrastructure to rebuild. They are asking for help, not from the Council, from us." Lysara looked at the map. She saw the system she had hunted Kale through, the frozen moons, the jungle planets, the radiation-scarred mining colonies, places where she had kicked down doors and dragged people away in the name of a lie. "We can't just leave them," Lysara said. "We broke the system. We have to help them build a new one." "Run for office?" Kale asked warily. "No." Lysara shook her head. She stood up, ignoring the sheet as she walked to her closet and pulled out a fresh tunic. She didn't reach for her armor. "No more rulers. We give them tools. We take the data we stole, the evidence of how the Nine manipulated the markets, the media, the wars, and we teach them how to see it. We build open-source AI watchdogs. We create archives. We travel to these worlds and we train them to spot the next lie before it takes root." Kyle watched her. She was pacing now, her mind working, her eyes bright with a new fire. It wasn't the fire of vengeance. It was the fire of creation. "A transparency tour," Kale said, a smile spreading across his face. "Teaching the galaxy how to spy on its leaders." "Exactly," Lysara said. "We turn everyone into a hunter, but this time they hunt the truth." Kale looked at Jax. "I think we have a mission." Jax sighed, though he was smiling. "Great, more work, no pay. And now I have to be the third wheel on a honeymoon road trip across the galaxy. I hate you both." They traveled for 6 months. It was not a victory lap. It was a penance. They went back to the worlds Lysara had terrorized. They landed in the neon slums of Typhon, the ice cities of Borealis, the rust yards of Persephone 4. In each place, the reception was mixed. Some cheered them as the liberators who had toppled the Nine. Others remembered Lysara only as the queen's executioner. On the jungle world of Zura, Lysara stood in a town square facing a crowd of angry locals. They held up pictures of family members who had disappeared during the purges she had enforced. "I cannot bring them back," Lysara told them. Her voice amplified over the square. She did not hide behind guards. She stood alone on the stage. "I was a weapon used against you. I believed I was bringing justice, but I was bringing tyranny. I am sorry. I will spend the rest of my life trying to balance that ledger." A stone flew from the crowd, striking her on the cheek. A cut opened up, bleeding violet. Kyle stepped forward, his hand on his gun, but Lysara stopped him. She didn't flinch. She didn't wipe the blood away. "You have the right to be angry," she said. "Use that anger. Watch your leaders. Watch me. Never let anyone tell you that obedience is a virtue." Slowly, the crowd settled. They didn't forgive her, not then. Perhaps not ever, but they listened. They took the data drives Jax handed out. They accepted the tools. It was a start. Forgiveness, Lysara learned, was not a single event. It was a slow, uneven road. But there were moments of grace. On the agri-world of Hestia, they met a community of refugees, survivors of the Aurea massacre. Kyle was tense, expecting to be blamed for his failure to save them 15 years ago. Instead, an old woman walked up to him. She looked at his face, then at Lysara. "You are the boy who refused to plant the bomb," she said. "We saw the records. The 9 released the audio." Kyle nodded, his throat tight. "I couldn't stop them." "You tried," she said, "and you came back." Then, a young woman stepped forward. She was barely 20. She looked at Lysara. "I remember you," the woman said. "You were the girl in the white robes, the one who screamed." Lysara nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "I am. I used to be afraid of the Huntress," the woman said. "But you aren't the Huntress anymore, are you?" "No," Lysara whispered. The young woman stepped forward and hugged her. It was awkward at first, stiff and hesitant, but then the woman held tighter, and Lysara crumbled. She wrapped her arms around the girl, burying her face in her shoulder. She wept. She wept for her mother, for the years she had lost to hatred, for the childhood that had been stolen from both of them. Kyle watched from a few feet away, his own eyes wet. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was one of his old contacts, a man named Silas who had called him a traitor for a decade. "You did good, kid," Silas grunted. "Took you long enough, but you did good." Kyle looked at Silas, then at Lysara, who was being held by the people she had once sworn to avenge. "Being a hero is complicated," Kale said, wiping his eyes. "Being a human is complicated," Silas corrected. "Heroism is just the part that makes the news." The final stop was a construction site in deep space, near the tranquil swirls of the Azure Nebula. The night bloom drifted silently near the hull of a massive new station. It was skeletal, unfinished, a framework of girders and optimism. It was the site of the new interspecies assembly, a place built not by secret councils, but by public charter. Kyle and Lysara stood on the hull of their ship, wearing magnetic boots and pressure suits. The helmet comms were open, the only sound the rhythmic breathing of the other. "It looks fragile," Lysara noted, looking at the half-built station. "Democracy usually is," Kyle said. "It is messy. It is slow. They will argue over the budget for the cafeteria for 3 years. Better than efficiency bought with blood," Lysara said. She turned to him. Through the glass of her helmet, her violet eyes were crinkled with a smile. "So, we are unemployed. The galaxy is safe-ish. Jax is complaining about boredom. What do we do now? I hear there is a bakery on the capital world looking for a pastry chef. Kale deadpanned. And I bet they need security. A pastry chef. Lysara laughed. You would eat all the profits. She stepped closer, her mag boots clanking on the hull. She put her gloved hands on his shoulders. You know, she said, her voice dropping to a teasing lilt. I have been thinking about what you said at the cemetery station. I said a lot of things. Kyle deflected, grinning. I was very eloquent. The line, she insisted. You are on time, I told the Huntress. 9 lie here. Yours is next. It was ridiculously dramatic. Kale, did you rehearse that in the mirror? Kale laughed, but his eyes grew serious. He looked at her, really looked at her, suspended there against the backdrop of the nebula. I meant it, he said softly. Every word. I knew that was the moment. You had to choose. If you had chosen to be the next lie, if you had chosen the 9, I wouldn't have fought you. I would have let you kill me, and I would have stayed there with you. Yours was next. Mine would have been right beside it. Lysara's smile faded into a look of fierce, overwhelming love. She pressed her helmet against his, a space kiss, the closest they could get in the vacuum. You are a fool, she whispered, but you are my fool. She pulled back. From now on, no more lies. We choose the truth, even when it is hard, even when it hurts. Deal, Kyle said. Now. Lysara turned back to the airlock. Let's get inside. Jax says he found a lead on a pirate warlord hoarding medical supplies in the rim. I think they need a visit from a transparency consultant. Kale groaned. I thought we were taking a vacation. Justice never sleeps. Chef, she called back, disappearing into the airlock. Kyle watched her go. He looked back at the nebula, at the fragile new station, and then at the stars that were no longer hiding places, but destinations. He smiled, tapped his suit controls, and followed her inside. The night bloom fired its engines. The bioluminescent veins along its hull pulsed with a deep, healthy blue. The ship turned away from the nebula, orienting toward the wild frontier of the rim. Inside, 3 people were arguing about who was going to cook dinner. The ship accelerated, stretching into a streak of light as it hit the fold stream. It vanished into the void, not running from anything but racing toward everything. The galaxy was messy, flawed, and recovering. But for the first time in a generation, the stars were just stars, and the future was unwritten, and Kale and Lysara were finally truly on time.